This is my trick to make this jig slide better. It will move on round rods. We will see that in a moment. We will also see a trick to prevent the board from splitting. Something that happens sometimes, especially with cheap plywood. And I love this trick. What to do if one of the teeth or a slot is going to end up narrower than the others. Alright, it's really annoying when a jig doesn't slide well on the router table. But this router table doesn't have slots. No problem. I screw a pair of wooden strips to each side. And now, the trick of using guide rods is that the contact and friction surface is smaller than with wooden strips. And also, look at this. I place the wooden strips in a way that the rods stick out slightly above the surface of the table. This way, the base of the jig won't rub against the table. I have already measured where everything goes, and I glue the rods under the base of the jig. I let the wood rod stick out at the front because I don't want the finger joints jig to tip forward when I push it. While the CA glue dries, I keep the rods pressed against the sides of the router table. Well, it's looking neat and nice. I need to sand something. I have to sand the top part of the section of the rods that stick out. This is so that the front of the jig does sit on top of the board. That will prevent too much sawdust from getting under the jig. That's the front of the jig, but we'll see that there will be more than one. And I add some reinforcements. I like to put a wooden block behind the front of the jig so the router bit doesn't stick out the back. And this is the handle from a handsaw I no longer use. I reinforce everything with screws. I check that none of them are sticking out. And, of course, something always happens. No worries, I move the screw, and it's fixed. Here it's easy to apply a bit of natural soap, a trick to make it slide even better. It also works with drawers that have wooden guides. Look how smoothly it moves. And now another trick. I cut 4 more pieces for the front of the jig. I make sure to drill the holes in the same place on all 4. And these small blocks are to hold the screws that go into those new holes. I continue the pilot holes into the small blocks. And now we'll see what the new jig fronts are for. The first one is for making box joints with a 6mm router bit. The second one is for making them with a 10mm router bit. The third one is for using with a 12mm straight router bit. And the fourth is useless. That's what I get for using cheap boards. This board is about 6mm thick. I cut 2 pieces to make the key that allows you to route the teeth and slots all the same. One is to make the key, and the other is to adjust the exact gap between the key and the router bit. The key is glued into the slot I just made, and not into the first one, although I could actually route the first slot, glue the key, adjust the spacing, and then route the second slot. And maybe it would be more precise working with the key already glued in. This other board is a bit thicker than the 10mm slot. I cut 2 pieces and sand them carefully not to overdo it. The mistake here is that I'm making the keys too tall. We'll see that in a second. If I press too much there, the teeth will end up narrower than the slots. And if I leave too much slack, the teeth will end up wider than the slots. For the 12mm router bit slot, I'm going to use this small strip of wood. I cut some pieces and sand them so they fit perfectly, and we'll soon see that I made the keys too tall. And now, when I cut the slot for this board, the key will be too tall for the slot. At least this key, which I made in 2 pieces, is easy to cut down. Now, sure we all know how a jig for making box joints works. But what about this? When the number of slots and teeth isn't exact, and the last one ends up too narrow? We'll see the trick in a second. But first I turn this around and finish making this joint. It will serve to show another trick. That is what happens when using cheap boards. To avoid it, if we leave the key a bit long, we can have another piece with identical slots and place it against the workpiece. We can have one already prepared for each router bit diameter to use whenever we use the jig. This way it holds the wood and prevents splitting. Let's tackle this problem. When the width of the board is not equal to the diameter of the router bit multiplied by an integer, and we don't have another more suitable bit, we'll end up with an extra tooth, or with a narrower slot. Before routing the board, we measure the board's width. We divide it by the router bit diameter. We take the decimal part and multiply it by the bit diameter. Remember that we didn't routed the board yet, so we cannot measure the teeth directly on the workpiece. We add that result to the bit diameter and divide the sum by 2. That's the measurement we should leave at both ends. So instead of starting like this, I start by measuring here the tooth width I just calculated, and I finish this board the usual way. That will make a well-centered box joint. Now I need to measure to route a slot of the same width. Here we can see better the slot I'm going to route at the end of the board, and it will be the same width as the tooth on the first board. And now I can continue as always. Good thing I remembered the anti-splinter and anti-splitting trick. Ideally, we could always use a router bit, or a board width, that gives an exact number of teeth and slots, and if possible an odd number, so each board starts and ends with a tooth, or starts and ends with a slot. But if not, this measuring trick gives a pretty decent result. Thanks for watching the video, and if you like my videos, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell.